They stopped for the formal presentation of kata, a white scarf, a Tibetan custom of greeting and respect. The Dalai Lama bowed with hands pressed together at his heart, the gesture of welcome that recognizes our oneness. The Archbishop took off his fisherman's cap and bowed in return. The Dalai Lama then draped the long white silk scarf around the Archbishop's neck. They whispered into each other's ears, trying to talk over the noise of the jet still droning in the background. The Dalai Lama took the Archbishop's hand, and then they were more 8 than 80, laughing and making jokes together as they strolled toward the terminal, yellow umbrellas sheltering above them. Even though the Archbishop's white scarf was bunched around his neck, it still hung all the way down his small body. The size of the kata one gives is a sign of the esteem that one holds for the recipient, high lamas receiving the longest ones. This kata was the longest one I had ever seen. The Archbishop joked throughout the week, as kata after kata was draped around his neck, that he felt like a human coat rack. We were ushered into a small room with a couple of brown couches set aside for the Dalai Lama to await his often delayed or cancelled flights out of Dharamshala. We could see the media gathered outside the airport, lining the glass wall waiting for a chance to snap a photograph or ask a question. It was only then that I recalled how newsworthy and even historic this trip was. It had been so easy to get lost in the logistics and to forget that their time together was an important event for the world. In the lounge, the Archbishop relaxed into a couch while the Dalai Lama was perched in a large chair beside him. Next to the Archbishop sat his daughter, Pho, who was dressed in a brilliant green and red African print dress, her head wrapped with a matching fabric. The youngest of 4 children, she followed her father into the ministry and was now the executive director of the Desmond and Leah Tutu Legacy Foundation. During our trip, Pho would get down on bended knee and propose to her girlfriend, Marceline Van Firth. The trip was only a couple months before the U.S. Supreme Court made its landmark ruling legalizing gay marriage, but the Archbishop had supported gay rights for decades. He famously had said that he would refuse to go to a homophobic heaven. What many forget, especially those who find themselves on the receiving end of his moral censure, is that the Archbishop decrees any form of oppression or discrimination, wherever he might find it. Shortly after the marriage, Pho was stripped of her ministry because the South African Anglican Church does not recognize gay marriage. "I was really looking forward to coming to your birthday," the Dalai Lama said, "but your government had some difficulties. At that time you expressed some very strong words," the Dalai Lama said as he put his hand on the Archbishop's forearm, "and I appreciated it." Strong words was an understatement. The week in Dharamshala to celebrate the Dalai Lama's birthday had its origins 4 years earlier, when Archbishop Tutu celebrated his own 80th birthday in Cape Town, South Africa. The Dalai Lama had been invited to be the guest of honor, but the South African government bowed to the pressure from the Chinese government and was unwilling to issue the Dalai Lama a visa. China is one of the major buyers of South African minerals and raw materials. The Archbishop was daily on the front page of the South African newspapers leading up to the celebration, railing against the government for their perfidy and duplicity. He even compared the ruling African National Congress, the party whose members he fought for decades to help bring out of exile and imprisonment, to the long-hated apartheid government. He said they were actually worse, because at least in the case of the apartheid government, the villainy was overt. "I always try to avoid any inconvenience," the Dalai Lama said with a grin, and then pointed to the Archbishop. "But I was happy someone else was willing to be an inconvenience. I was very happy." "I know," the Archbishop said. "You use me. That's the trouble. You use me and I don't learn." The Archbishop then put out his hand and took the Dalai Lama's tenderly. "When the South Africans refused to let you come for my 80th birthday, it made the whole event all the more spectacular, because we had Google hosting our conversation, and there was a lot more press interested than there might have otherwise been. But never mind. Wherever you are, there is a lot of interest. I'm not jealous. You know, I remember when we were in Seattle, they were looking for a venue that would be large enough for the people who wanted to come see you, and it ended up that they found a football stadium. There were 70,000 people who wanted to come hear this man, and he can't even speak English properly. The Dalai Lama let out a big belly laugh. It's really not nice, the Archbishop continued. You really need to pray that I become a little more popular like you. To tease someone is a sign of intimacy and friendship, to know that there is a reservoir of affection from which we all drink as funny and flawed humans. And yet their jokes were as much about themselves as about each other, never really putting the other down, but constantly reinforcing their bond and their friendship. The Archbishop wanted to thank and introduce each of the people who had helped make the trip possible. He introduced his daughter Fo, philanthropist and peace builder Pam Ahmadiyar, and me, but the Dalai Lama said he already knew all of us. Then he introduced my wife, Rachel, as his American doctor, Pat Christian, a colleague of Pam's from the Ahmadiyar group, and his daughter's soon-to-be fiancée, Marceline, a pediatrician and professor of epidemiology in Holland. He did not need to introduce the final member of our party, the Venerable Lama Tenzin Dundin, who was a member of the Dalai Lama's own Namgyal monastery. Now the Dalai Lama was rubbing their Archbishop's hand warmly, as he would throughout the week. They were talking about the flight itinerary and our stopover in Amritsar. This is very good, necessary to rest, the Dalai Lama said. I always sleep 8 to 9 hours a night. But you get up very early, don't you? The Archbishop asked. That's right, 3 o'clock. 3 o'clock? Always. And you pray 5 hours? The Archbishop was holding up 5 fingers for emphasis. Yes. The Archbishop looked upward and shook his head. No, that's too much. Sometimes I do meditation on the nature of self using what is known as the sevenfold analysis, the Dalai Lama said. Jinpa later explained that this is a Buddhist contemplative practice in which one searches for the true nature of the self by analyzing the relationship between oneself and the physical and mental aspects of our body and mind. For example, the Dalai Lama continued, now when I look at you and I analyze, I see that this is my dear respected friend, Bishop Tutu. No, this is his body, not himself. This is his mind, but not himself. The Dalai Lama leaned in to emphasize his point, presenting a paradoxical riddle as old as Buddhism. Where is Bishop Tutu's self? We can't find it. He slapped the Archbishop's forearm playfully. The Archbishop looked a little mystified and a little bemused. Really? So now, the Dalai Lama concluded, in quantum physics, they also have a similar view. Any objective thing does not really exist. There is nothing ultimately we can find. This is similar to analytical meditation. The Archbishop put his hands over his face in bewilderment. I couldn't do that. The Dalai Lama may have been arguing against there being an essential Bishop Tutu, but at the same time there was a person, a friend that was special to him in a way that, despite his friendliness to all, was unique and clearly important to him. Jinpa and I discussed what it was about this relationship that probably meant so much. For both of them, it was rare to have a true friend. There are, after all, not many members of the Moral Leaders Club. Their lives are filled with people who relate to them as icons. It must be a relief to find someone who is not looking for a photo op. Certainly, they also share values at a place where the core of all religions meet, and of course they share a fantastic sense of humor. I was beginning to see how central friendship and relationship more generally was in our experience of joy. This was a theme that would arise many times in our week together. I tell people, said the Archbishop, that one of the greatest things about you is your serenity. And I say, well, every day he spends those 5 hours in the morning meditating. And it shows in how you respond to things that are agonizing. The pain of your country and the pain of the world. As I say, I try, but 5 hours is too much. The Archbishop, characteristically humble and self-effacing, was dismissing his own 3 or 4 hours of prayer a day. It is true, he sleeps in until 4. What is it, I wondered, about spiritual leaders that they are always getting up early to pray and meditate? It clearly makes a great difference in how they approach their day. When I first heard that the Dalai Lama got up at 3 a.m., I thought I was going to hear another story of superhuman devotion and learn that he slept only 2 or 3 hours a night. I was relieved to hear that he simply went to bed very early, typically by 7 p.m. Not exactly practical for a householder who has children to feed and get to bed, I thought, but perhaps getting to bed an hour earlier and up an hour earlier was possible. Would it lead to more spiritual growth? Would it lead to more joy? The Dalai Lama held the Archbishop's hand up to his cheek. So now we go to my home.